This is June 13th, and this day in Baptist history, we're reading Champion of the Faith. Our scripture reading is Romans chapter 8 and verse 18. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. The Russian Orthodox Church has a long history of persecuting the Baptists throughout the vast land of Russia. From August 20th, 1867, when a German Baptist named Martin Kalweit immersed Nikita Vorin in a creek near the Kura River in the Caucasus of southern Russia, persecution from the Russian Orthodox Church has been a reality. Finally, in 1879, the Baptist sect was legalized, but little toleration was experienced, for the Orthodox church leaders feared that the aggressive evangelistic and missionary outreach of the Baptists. Prior to November 7, 1917, when the main part of the Tsarist Empire fell to the control of the atheistic communist Soviet regime, the Russian Orthodox Church reigned as a state church, and they utilized the police power of the state to persecute the Baptists. Opposition led to extended prison sentences and exile for many Baptist ministers. One Baptist leader wrote of those days in these words, and I quote, "This was a time of horrible persecutions. Exiles, arrests, fines, and beatings of believers rained down abundantly upon the audacious followers of the gospel. Under continual fear of being caught by the police, the brothers nevertheless did not cease their meetings, holding them in basements, in the woods, in the cemetery, in ravines, and in the apartments of the more well-to-do brothers." End of quote. A full account of the sufferings of our Baptist brethren under the communist regimes has yet to be written, but more and more data is becoming available. The KGB, which is the dread Russian secret police archives, were opened to Georgy Vins in 1995, and he was able to inspect the secret files that had been kept on his father, the Reverend Peter Vins. He discovered that the file on his father alone was 450 pages, and he learned that his father had been shot to death on August 26, 1937. While ministering in Russia back in 1996, I had the privilege of interviewing the Reverend Vladimir Zenko, I'll get that right, pastor of the Moscow Unregistered Evangelical Baptist Church. He spoke freely of two imprisonments that he had endured recently. Vladimir was born on June 13, 1950, to godly parents. In the early 1960s, his father, P.S. Zenko, had represented the Baptists and the Reverend Georgy Vins in requesting a meeting with Nikita Khrushchev, the premier of the Soviet Union. Their efforts were futile, but P.S. Zenko was a vocal leader among the Baptists. Vladimir's mother, Vera, was a believer and an outstanding woman of God. In that spiritual environment, young Vladimir was converted in June of 1963, and on June 20 he expressed his faith publicly in the waters of baptism. Just 6 years later, on September 2nd, 1969, the 19-year-old Vladimir was arrested for leading the singing in sequestered Baptist meetings in the force. He was found guilty of crimes against the people and was sent to a labor camp in the western Ukraine, not far from the Romanian border, where he worked in the mines. During his imprisonment, the KGB attempted to brainwash him, but to no avail. Having completed his sentence, he was released on September 2nd, 1972. Vladimir's brother Paul was also incarcerated in the Ukraine for his faith. After his release, Vladimir matured in his life and service. He married a godly wife and continued to study and to grow spiritually. The local congregation ordained him in the gospel ministry on August 10, 1980. He became pastor of the church that he still serves. However, the trials were not over, for on February 24, 1984, he was again accosted by 3 members of the KGB, arrested and imprisoned. He was taken to the Matroska prison northeast of Moscow for this term of incarceration. His sentence again called for hard labor. His faithful wife and 2 small daughters were allowed to visit him once a year. Upon his release from the prison on February 24, 1987, the Reverend Vladimir Zenko was informed that he could not live in Moscow. He was told that the dangerous criminal element, the Baptists, were too many in number there. Being unwilling to submit to such a ruling, the young pastor dared to return to Moscow, and his congregation welcomed him with open arms. 3 days later, however, the local militia visited him and gave him 72 hours to leave the city limits. With the financial deterioration of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, in a meeting with President George Bush at Malta, sought aid once again from the United States of America. To the credit of President Bush, he refused to give any assistance until there was an openness and a reconstruction which stretched to include religious freedom. Only in the face of financial destruction did the communist warlords surrender to the demand. Thus, Reverend Vladimir Zenko was at liberty to return to his flock and lead them as their spiritual shepherd. Their 2 oldest children are now studying in America, and the Lord has blessed them with a 3rd daughter who remains with them. To God be the glory.